Before I start, I actually would be interested to hear, have any of you heard something here so far that you disagree with, or that you think is doesn't make any sense at all, or anyone? No?
Form a line at the door.
So there is one person? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. What did you disagree with?
Yeah, so it's not really a disagreement, but I guess it was just kind of a thought that I had come up with, and it was about investments in research and development. And I think that one of the issues that we're facing is it'd be nice if firms were investing in research and development and innovation on the green front, but what we have is that a lot of the money in the economy now is going into large, or not in the economy, but in the stock market, is going towards large monopolies and these large firms like Amazon, et cetera, who are not investing, who are not putting a lot of money in research and development, that are actually now just inflating the price of their stock through stock buybacks. And I think that having to break up the power of these monopolies is going to be essential to get money put back into research and development. So that's.
I'll hold it. Yeah, go ahead.
Buried in everything that I've heard is the assumption that the holy grail is the private sector. And why the fetishization of the private sector? We know that in case of societal danger and so on, we revert to the public sector in every case because it's too important to leave in the hands of the private sector. So why is it this mania, this marriage to an outdated concept? Thank you.
Okay, before we go on, I just I think what I'm hearing, I think most of you probably have an agreement that climate change is a problem that needs to be addressed, and maybe there is some debate about what are the best solutions to tackle it. Is that more or less an accurate position? So the question I think that a lot of you might have is why is it that when there is this huge problem, why is it that there aren't more people in a room like this one pushing for solutions and trying to get to the bottom of tackling this issue, or pushing governments to take action and trying to ensure that when we have election campaigns that this issue is discussed prominently and that politicians are pressed to come up with answers or solutions? Would that be, I mean, does that seem to make sense? So, as you know, right now, Canada has just purchased a pipeline for a lot of money. So you're all co-owners of a $4.5 billion purchase that has provided you ownership in the oil and gas industry, and your tax dollars and the assets that you have. Some of your lives and your well-being is now dependent on this asset. I'm stating what the government has done, not necessarily saying that that it's a good decision or not. But how many of you would know that there are 3 people who were part of the company that now work for the government, who walked away? You know, when they transferred into government jobs, they made millions of dollars in bonuses. Are there people here who don't know that?
I didn't know that.
So there are 3 people who worked for Kinder Morgan who now work for the government, and when they transferred over to work for the government, they were given $3.9 million in bonuses, or they will get $3.9 million in bonuses, these 3 people, over the next 2 years. There are also 5 people who work for this company and were able to cash out in $6 million in stock options because of the purchase. Now, the reason you if you didn't know that, the reason you don't know that is because there isn't enough media covering these sorts of issues, writing about it and reporting about it. So those of you who would subscribe or know National Observer would actually know that these things are happening. And when there are media outlets that pursue these issues and write about them, hold the government to account for decisions, and look between the lines, read between the lines, and study carefully every decision government has made and investigates them, it informs the public and it helps for a more engaged debate. So, this is one of the solutions that, we as a media organization, we're only 3 years old. And we have built up a following of paid subscribers. I mean, our stories are free. Anyone is free to read them. There are limits that we set, like most other media outlets, that when you hit up to 5 articles a month, that we're asking people to subscribe. But in the meantime, we are investigating important issues and trying to promote a more informed public and a more engaged audience to debate about these issues and learn about them. And it's only when people strive to be informed that you can truly ensure that government is having an honest debate, that political parties are talking about all the issues, and not just superficially, not just with talking points such as, this policy is going to raise the cost of everything, and so we have to stop right now, or a political party that might say your jobs are in danger if we pursue this path, or this government is trying to shut down business everywhere. I mean, these sorts of knee-jerk political statements is the sort of thing that happens when the media isn't doing its job, and when the public is left with maybe some superficial coverage that doesn't go as far as it needs to go. So, an issue like Kinder Morgan, what we did at National Observer is we dug deep, from the moment the government was, or the regulator was reviewing this project, and we asked a lot of questions, and where we couldn't get the questions answered, we dug deeper and we used the tools that journalists have learned how to use, such as using access to information, making a lot of phone calls, not just accepting a one-line answer, not accepting when someone doesn't want to give an interview or doesn't want to answer questions in depth. We find ways to dig deeper. And, there's all sorts of situations that arose over the past 2 years that, once we started writing about it, we started to identify that there were people within government, within the public service, that wanted to change the way things were going, that didn't feel comfortable about the ways that First Nations were being consulted. They approached us and we started talking with them. I remember a situation in the past year. I mean, in multiple cities, I was traveling to, doing some work here in Ottawa. I traveled to Calgary. I traveled to Vancouver. I talked to a lot of people to investigate what was going on behind the scenes. And I remember one situation where there was a key source. I was going to meet early morning for a coffee, and I got a text message maybe about 5 minutes before telling me that don't come in. My boss just showed up, and I might get caught. So these sorts of things. This is part of the work that we do that you don't see everywhere, and that is part of the solution to delivering the truth, the facts and evidence to people. It's not just something that you can snap your fingers and deploy to solve a problem. It takes a lot of hard work and dedication and persistence to get to the bottom of what's happening. So this sort of work that we did, it all of these reports ended up being used by First Nations and brought before the Federal Court of Appeal. they read all of the reporting that we did. Maybe not all of you did, because I understand not all of you might not have known National Observer before today, but I hope you go home and remember it after today. And you know, without this, there wouldn't now be a situation where the federal government knows that if it wants to proceed with this project, at least it has to sit down with First Nations in a respectful and meaningful way, and talk to them in a nation-to-nation format where they understand that these First Nations that are directly affected, more than about 115 or so along the route and near the route of this project, the government has to sit down with them and find out what works for them, and is there a way to accommodate the impacts on their way of life. Now, you know, over the past year, there have been situations where, you know, last year at the United Nations Climate Change Summit, the areas where countries around the world are trying to solve these problems, where, you know, in terms of the Canadian media, National Observer was the only one that was there. And in last year in Germany, the climate summit in Bonn, there was only one reporter there, and that was me. So as you know, one of the issues that was quite important here that needs to be addressed is in Alberta right now, you have more than 100,000 people that have jobs that are dependent on the oil and gas sector. And what we need to do right now is, I mean, in terms of as a society, if we want to move away from fossil fuels, there is a need for governments to come up with policies to transition, to work with these industries and find ways to ensure that there are new economies, new jobs being created that allow these workers not to be just sent off onto the streets. And you know, we're talking about a society where people have lived or depended on this industry for decades. They're you know, used to, like many of you, used to living in a certain lifestyle, and a lot of the lifestyles that we live here right now are somewhat dependent on this economy. And so it's incumbent upon the government to create what I think a lot of people talk about as a just transition. And we can't do that, though, if the government isn't proposing anything. So in Bonn, you know, there was a situation where there were a bunch of labor union representatives there that were pressing the government to come up with a plan. The government had promised one, the new Liberal government. They had talked about it a lot, but they had yet to take any concrete steps. And I remember, you know, that week that I was there, there was a coal plant in Alberta, or a coal company that was just starting to issue layoff notices for, I think, like 200 or 300 workers. And the labor unions there were saying, so, I mean, these job losses are already happening now. This is somewhat related to what the previous government had done, at least in terms of introducing regulations to limit the amount of emissions from coal-fired power plants. So the layoffs are happening. Both the Alberta government for, you know, a generation, and the federal government has never actually thought about doing this. And so, you know, myself being there, I was able to report that you know, the government showed up expecting we're going to have this terrific session where, you know, Canada is seen as, you know the old Canada is back and we're leaders on climate change because we accept it, we're taking action. Suddenly the government was forced to answer a news report saying, well, you haven't actually done anything, and they've started to take steps, but they need to probably do a lot more. Right now, the Just Transition Plan that they've introduced only applies to the coal industry, but they've yet to introduce anything for fossil fuels. Now, it takes reporters and it takes journalism to start doing more investigations and more coverage of this sort of issue. And, to do that, it requires all of you, I think, to press media outlets, including ours, to do more of this sort of coverage and continue to follow the issue. If you're not seeing it in the media you're consuming, well, either press them to do more or go towards the media outlets that are doing it and share their work and help promote it. Last week or 2 weeks ago at the G7, the 7 largest economies in the world are meeting to discuss. The energy ministers, environment ministers are meeting. And again, there were other media outlets that were covering it, but there was only one media outlet in Canada that sent a specialized reporter with expertise in climate change and energy to cover this summit. So the world is meeting in Halifax on our own soil, and the media outlets are not even covering it. When this conference wrapped up, Carl Meyer, our reporter, he was the only one there asking questions at the end of this news conference. If you can believe, only one reporter there. So what happens if there's no media there? If there's no one to write about climate change, are we actually going to tackle it? I hope that is not the case. I think what we're doing at National Observer, we've started to build up an audience of subscribers and people who follow us. We have right now we're averaging between 500,000 to 1 million readers a month, unique readers coming to read various stories. But we need more. When you have a situation where a lot of other media outlets are hitting these numbers on a week-by-week basis. But these are the sorts of things that I think we can tackle. There's some other points I can make about the debate, and I'll just say it very, very quickly. We're tracking issues right now where some industry who doesn't want, or industry stakeholders who do not want to take action on climate change, I think they've gone beyond the denying it's happening, and they're shifting debates now towards, yes, it's a problem, but this solution, and here where we have people debating about what's the best solution, some of it might not be a factor in this room, but outside of this room, there are people who expect or suddenly believe that any action will be harmful and or not as effective. So we are tracking a campaign right now that is seeking to stop the Liberal government's, any action the Liberal government takes, because it's trying to convince people through pretty sophisticated tactics that include using a think tank to produce reports, getting different industry leaders who are not necessarily oil and gas companies, but from other areas, to all sort of spread a message saying that fighting climate change is a losing battle, so we might as well give up. Now, we have a leaked document that we're going to report on soon that'll map all of this out. We have seen some parts of this strategy that have started to be activated. So we've tracked, from they planned this in January, and we've seen some of the steps have already been taken. And I think it's important for stories like this to be shared widely, and for people to know that when they're going to the polls thinking, oh, climate change is not that much of a big issue, I'm not going to vote on it, they have to understand what has gone on, or what kind of programming, you could almost say, has gone on to make people think that this shouldn't be such a huge issue, or to be afraid to take action on it. So I'll maybe leave it at that. I'm happy to take questions, and I'll turn it back over to Manfred. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Unfortunately, Mike just blew our cover and revealed that we're a subversive organization trying to promote optimism when the official line is pessimism.